Hey everyone, this is Brian from the Tennis IQ podcast. Josh and I hope that you are enjoying the content and discussions that we put out week after week. If you'd like to support the podcast and help us to continue to produce quality episodes, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership. Currently, we have 3 tiers of support: the fan level at $3 per month, the supporter level at $7 per month, and the champion level at $20 per month. Benefits of joining the Tennis IQ podcast community include episode transcripts, participation in book club discussions, and access to monthly masterclasses with me and Josh. For more on these benefits of support, head on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership. Thank you so much. And now, on to the show. Welcome to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Brian Lomax.
And I'm Josh Berger. And in today's episode, we are going to be talking a little bit about identity. And we're actually going to be, some of this conversation is based on an article titled "The Psychological Pitfalls of Tying Self-Worth and Happiness to Performance," which is from Kevin Lake and Michael Gervais. And really, this article, it kind of breaks down two different types of identity: a performance-based identity and a purpose-based identity. And we can talk a little bit about, what each of those are. And I think probably even by their names, people can probably start to guess, what those are. But it's interesting because this is in Fast Company, which is more of a business publication. And Michael Gervais has done a lot of work on the sport and performance psychology side of things within businesses, within professional sports teams. I know he's done work with Red Bull, Michael Schumacher, and I think it's just an interesting sort of way to look at things in terms of being able to break things down, because I think for a lot of people, and this is both true in business and sport, I think people are conditioned to fall into this performance-based identity and view themselves in terms of, okay, my worth is tied to how I perform. And I think we're conditioned that way. I think in many ways that's almost the default state. But in this, the authors provide an alternative, the purpose-based identity, and being able to really prioritize that and prioritize, making an impact, making a difference. And, that the context of that can be different, obviously. And really trying to, maybe in a tennis context, can we really try to be clear about, why we do what we do, and be clear about some of these, deeper level things where it's, instead of it all being about winning and performance, purpose being prioritized in a greater way. So really like this article, and Brian, wanted to see what some of your thoughts were on it.
I also really liked it and underlined a lot about it. And so as I was reading it, Josh, and kind of finished it, it reminded me of some of the concepts we've talked about in the past, especially with purpose, and taking an existential approach of looking at your tennis game or tennis as a life project, not just about wins and losses, but this is something that has meaning for you, is a passionate pursuit of something. I think for many of us, it's a passionate pursuit of trying to become the best that we can become. And, that's not defined by wins and losses. So, and we've talked about the dangers of tying one's self-worth to results and performance. Even if we go back to, sort of one of the great books in positive psychology, Flow, the psychology of optimal experience by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. He talks about how if competition is all about winning and losing, then the activity will lose enjoyment. You as the participant will start to enjoy it less. And so purpose is a really important part of this. And I think the cool thing about purpose is you get to choose what it is. You get to choose the meaning. And it doesn't have to make sense to someone else. It just has to make sense. It just has to work for you so that can become a passionate pursuit, a passionate project for you. Um, when I read about the performance-based identity, I think this gives a name, Josh, to something that we see every day. As you mentioned, this is more of a business publication, and there was a notion that this identity is newer. Maybe it's newer to the workplace, but I think from a tennis perspective, this is kind of normal. When we talk about how we think about wins and losses and their effect on our confidence, their effect on how we think about ourselves. I think that's pretty normal, especially in a sport which is either one-on-one or two-on-two. There's a lot of individuality that goes with it. There's such natural comparisons with rankings and ratings that just the environment is just set up for you to base your identity on how you perform, to base your confidence on how you perform. So, how that's changed in the work world is very interesting, and I think, that's changed a lot over the last 50 to 60 years. And it's probably fostered more of a climate that requires people to be more performance based, given that, you kind of have to look out for yourself more than you would have in the past. How people are ranked and reviewed in corporations can be a competitive process. I know that that was the case for me in my corporate days, that there was a sort of what they called a stack ranking. So certain people had to be rated at the top, another percentage had to be in the middle, and another percentage at the bottom. And so it just sort of naturally led you to compare yourselves to others, and then to have conversations with your boss about why you were better than somebody else in your group. So I think the environment has fostered more and more of this in our society. And I think it was really good for the article to call it out and to try to help people understand the difference, and perhaps why the purpose-based perspective, the purpose-based identity, is a healthier way of looking at yourself than the performance-based one.
Yeah, I think it's healthier. I think it's more sustainable. The authors talk about sort of this almost finish line approach to that performance based identity, which is something that we've talked about in the past. Like when we've talked about the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, he talks about how, if the goal, for instance, is to run a 5K or a half marathon or whatever it is, then okay, I'm going to train, and I'm going to train until that day of the race, and I'm going to run the race, and then my goal's been achieved. Where instead, if the goal is more about, I want to be a runner, and putting that identity piece first, then okay, I've run that 5K, I've run that half marathon, whatever it is, but this is just a milestone. Where in this article, they talk about that same idea. And I'm quoting here, they say, in theory, if we perform successfully, we'll feel good about ourselves. If I can close that deal, if I get that promotion, if I get through that to-do list, if I make the honor roll, if I'm the top sales agent again this year, if I win our local club tournament, if I win Wimbledon, if my social post goes viral, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think a lot of people think this way. It's almost this never-ending finish line that, okay, in order for me to be successful, I need to achieve this, and I need to achieve this. And okay, that's great, I did this, but now what's next? Where instead, I think there is an alternative perspective where it's, can we live lives? Can we try to perform in a way that's anchored more around our purpose and more about, what are we trying to do, and having some of those questions a little bit more clearly defined, where it's not just about this one milestone or this one achievement. Those will come, and that's great. But it's more about, that sort of life project where, I'm trying to be the best tennis player that I can be. I'm trying to, see, try to really go for mastery in some of these different aspects, right? If we think about tennis, can I master the strength and conditioning aspect of the game? Can I try to get as close to mastering the mental aspect of the game? Can I try to master my technique? Can I try to master how well I can compete when I'm out there. Can I take more of that mastery approach, sort of that life project approach where, hey, I want to try to do I want to be the best player I can be. I want to do as much as I can with this sport. And that becomes, and maybe for each person there's that's slightly different in terms of, what their purpose is or why they're doing it in the first place. But, then it becomes more about that. And it's not just about, sort of, I think they say in the article, almost like a random assortment of competitors, right? Like, and I think this is true in that business context that you talk about, Brian, where it's okay, I'm in this corporate setting and there's these different people that I work with, and in a certain way that's random. I can't control or choose who I'm working with, but I get compared to these people and ranked against them. And it's the same thing ultimately in competitive tennis, where you're going to play matches and you're going to play matches against people who are, maybe better or at a higher level, people who are at a lower level, people around your level, or maybe higher, lower ranked or rated. But ultimately, that's kind of random. That's out of your control. That's just sort of that random smattering. Ultimately, if you can view it as the competition is more so yourself and doing your best, then it becomes more about mastery. It becomes more about that purpose piece rather than just, okay, I'm trying to beat whoever happens to be on the other side of the net for me.
Yeah, and I think it's worthwhile talking about some indications that perhaps performance-based identity has become a little bit too much a part of who you are. And I think the biggest one that I see, Josh, is avoidance of practice matches or playing tournaments. Because though there's a risk of failure there. And for all the things that you just said, they're present there. They're present in practice matches. They're present in um, match play groups. They're present in tournaments. And you can't control it. Um, what if you play somebody you beat the last time? Whoa, now I have to play them again? That could be a threat to how I feel about myself. And so as you ponder this, as you think about this performance-based identity, if you notice yourself avoiding challenges that could be really great learning opportunities, but you're avoiding them because you don't want to lose, because there's a risk of failure there, then that's something to really think a little bit more deeply about. Well, why am I playing this sport? What is my purpose for this? We talk a lot about mastery, but as you were speaking, Josh, earlier, it reminded me of Andre Agassi and how for a long time he hated tennis. And I think one of the things that really helped him to rededicate to tennis was purpose, was this idea of building a school in Las Vegas, a charter school that would help young kids. And now he's playing for that. Now he's playing for the funding of that. And that's a fantastic purpose. We're not all in a position necessarily to do that. But, I had a student some years ago as well who used her tennis to work for charitable, do some charitable work. And that was really meaningful to her because she had a family relative that had been involved with this particular charity, and she really wanted to do that. So that was something that really drove her. Is that something that would drive every one of us? Maybe not. But that's why the purpose that you choose only has to be understood by you. It doesn't have to be portable to everyone. Now, mastery is something we can all work on, but there might be other bigger reasons. So I think if we're avoiding certain challenging situations because there's a risk of failure, that's one sign that our identity is a little bit too tied to the performance-based side of things. If we start rationalizing maybe why we lost based on sort of selected evidence, if we start maybe not even looking at our losses because we just don't want to even deal with it, right? We're missing opportunities again for learning there. And another indication that we're a little bit too much performance based. Before we started recording, we were talking about how I don't think this has to be one or the other. I think a sport like tennis, there's going to be a certain amount of the way the sport is that how you feel about yourself, part of it's going to be driven by performance. It's just about how much, and then how much can be driven by purpose. It's very similar to motivation, in which it's practically impossible to be 100% intrinsically motivated. There are always things that we want to do that are sort of external to that. And I think the same goes for, this particular identity. We all want to maybe beat a certain player to a certain degree, or we want to win a certain event or a league, or we want to go to nationals. And these are great things for us to strive for, but they should come underneath the umbrella of purpose. Um, and so I think it's good to, just examine perhaps how much am I using performance to determine how I feel about myself, and is that healthy? What are some of the challenges with that? There's a really good quote from a leadership development professor at University of Southern California, Ben Holtberg. It says one of the most significant consequences of performance-based identity is that it requires people to devote cognitive and behavioral effort to maintaining their identity in the face of asymmetries. And I think asymmetries meaning kind of conflicting forces, adversity, etc. Right? And so we're in some ways rationalizing, maybe making excuses, trying to control the situation more than we really need to, just to support this identity, just to support this feeling good about myself. And I think it's a very, interesting way of looking at it. And then also, interrogating for yourself, okay, how much am I basing how I feel about myself on performance?
Totally, totally, and yeah, I think it's very easy to do that because also the people that we're around tend to see things in terms of performance, and we get credit based on our performance. People compliment us based on our performance. Sometimes there's other impacts. Whether it's making it onto a team or a scholarship or prize money or whatever it may be. But I think that it's very easy to think in this way, but I think there's a lot of drawbacks where I think it's almost this, I guess we could say almost like a hedonic treadmill where it's
Yeah.
it's never enough. It's never enough. Okay, I win this tournament, but now what's next? Right. And okay, and then I win this match. Okay, but then what's next? Where instead, if it's like, no, this, that's all great, but I'm trying to, I'm striving for something bigger. I'm striving to, be the best that I can be. And that's I understand what that process looks like. I think that's a more, yeah, I think that's a more sustainable way of looking at things. I think it helps handle those ups and downs better because every player goes through ups and downs. Every player has injuries, and every player has matches that they lose that they feel like they should win, or maybe slumps where that happens for a longer period of time, or other sorts of things that pop up. And I think if our identity is too based on performance, then then those those moments of turbulence, those ups and downs, those slumps, those lost matches, those injuries can really impact, how we feel about ourselves. If we identify just as tennis players and just as, okay, I'm a good player and that's who I am, then, when we hit moments like that, it really can shake us to our core, and it really can, feel like that's everything. Where instead, if this is, tennis is something that I do, tennis is my life project, tennis is something that I'm good at and I've spent a lot of time on, but it's not everything, then, we're able to handle those moments and sort of take them in stride, I think, a little bit more.
I think we could look at also sort of validation and approval as a part of this, meaning wins provide validation, praise provides validation, excuse me, and approval of what we're doing. But again, that's not controllable. And the idea of a purpose-based identity is to try to insulate yourself a little bit, insulate your how you feel about yourself from the need for external validation. And wins are external. Um, Praise is certainly external. So that's one reason to do that, to make sure that the wins and losses and what other people think don't affect how you feel about yourself as much. And instead, can we bring it back to the identity, which you mentioned earlier, Josh, different identity, but like the James Clear identity. I'm a runner. I'm a tennis player. Okay. If I'm a tennis player, what are the important values and behaviors that I want to commit to as a tennis player? And can I then evaluate a large part of my performance on how I conducted myself with respect to those values and those behaviors?
Yep.
And if I do that, right, that's controllable, then I can be, hopefully satisfied, proud of myself for having done that in the face of adversity. Or if I didn't do it, I can at least learn from it. And this is an opportunity to bring some self-compassion here, because what we're all doing is hard. Tennis is hard. It's a natural challenge. If we don't execute something exactly as we wanted to, that doesn't mean we're bad. We're bad players. We're bad people. It just shows that we have an opportunity to get better. And bringing some self-compassion to that can help you realize that you don't need to criticize yourself, because this is hopefully a lifelong pursuit. So if we could shift away from external validation and approval and more toward internal assessments of how we're doing with our own values, behaviors, um, etc., what we think is important, then I think we can develop a healthier relationship with our sport, a healthier relationship with competition. So competition, as you said, Josh, is not doesn't have to be me versus someone else. This is me comparing myself to me. And how am I doing in this pursuit? We know that our competitors really they make us better. They are the challenge. They're not the enemy. And so the more I think we can foster attitudes and beliefs around purpose, healthier conceptualizations of competition, the better we have a chance of managing our identity in a really positive way so that it can become more controllable and we can fulfill whatever purpose we are trying to fulfill in our project.
Totally, totally. And I like that you brought this up in the article, mentioned it as well, sort of seeing it as a filter, seeing it as a filter to make decisions. Where, okay, if my purpose is like Agassiz, okay, to start to start a charter school for kids, to maybe have them, have a better childhood, and maybe a more fulfilling childhood than he had in certain ways. Or if I have a really clear, deep-seated purpose, then it makes it a lot easier to make decisions because it's like, okay, if I'm deciding what I want to do on a particular day, or if I'm deciding how I want to try to prepare for my match, right? If my purpose is to be the best player that I can be, and I have this match coming up, okay, how I choose to prepare, I can, sort of run that through that filter. Okay, if I know what my purpose is, therefore, am I doing everything that I can do to be the best player that I can be? Or, if it's Agassiz, am I doing everything that I can do to make a difference for these kids, right? So I think purpose makes it a lot easier to make certain decisions and to, sort of orient our lives in a way that is based on that purpose.
It would be interesting to apply this to maybe the article we discussed in our previous episode with the lifestyle challenges of pro players, because there are certain systemic things in the pro tennis world, such as ranking points dropping off after a year. Do I keep playing with injuries? Do I play through this stuff? And I do think it would be helpful. I think it would be the kind of thing where you would, as a pro player, need to work with uh, a sports psych professional or a coach who really understood the idea of purpose and what we're really trying to achieve long term. Because I think even in that article, Josh, we saw a lot of performance based identity types of things, the money, the approval, etc. Um, And for those who haven't seen Eric Buderak's TEDx talk, definitely encourage you to watch it. Basically, I think it's called "Don't Dream Big." Um, his way of doing it actually shielded him from some of that performance-based identity because it wasn't about wins and losses. It was about improvement, day-to-day improvement, embracing the daily struggle, etc. So I think even for players who are in, let's say, more difficult circumstances because of the system, like pro players, bringing a purpose-based approach could certainly be helpful. But it's something I think you would need to work on with a coach who understood that. Um, David Samuel strikes me as a guy who totally gets that. We had him on the podcast some time ago. Or a sports psych professional who understands the difference between these two. Um, so I think that this is attainable for everybody who plays tennis, regardless of level and what your perhaps achievement dreams are. Can you also establish a purpose dream?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right, and I think that it takes time, right? The first time somebody picks up a racket, they're not gonna know. They're not gonna know. Okay, what is their purpose? It takes time to develop that. I think it takes some structure, like what you're saying, Brian. I think working with a sports psychology professional, talking it through with a coach, somebody that really focuses on this sort of thing, I think really makes a big difference as it relates to being able to be clear about that. Because I think if that's not clear, then it's very easy to fall into this, I would say, trap of just viewing things through a performance based perspective. So and sort of viewing our identity in that way, and I think that identity can be very fragile. It's that identity can be just based on our latest result. Okay, if I and I think actually this is going back to one of our earliest episodes, episode 2, we had Brian Barker on, who worked with James Blake for I think right around 15 years. He got up to number 4 in the world. Also Fairfield, Connecticut, local. But yeah, they talk about how or he talked about how we can't view ourselves just through our results, right? Where okay, I win a point, I'm a winner. Now I lose a point, what does that say about me? I guess I'm a loser. Then I win the next point, okay, I'm a winner. And then I lose, and then it's very easy to sort of ride that emotional roller coaster of winning and losing based on points within a match or based on matches in general. And the same can be said in terms of other results in life, right? Whether that's in a professional context, whether that's in a number of different contexts. It's very easy to sort of judge ourselves just based on those results and sort of ride that emotional roller coaster and take those ups and downs and and sort of just judge ourselves based on that most recent result, which I think a lot of people do. But there is another way, and I think that other way, as as we're saying, is I think in a lot of ways preferable. I think it's more sustainable, it's more resilient, it's more it equips you more to handle the ups and downs and twists and turns that are inevitable that everybody experiences ultimately. And I think it equips you for the long run. It equips you for this sort of life project that tennis really can be.
I think Brian Barker is a great example, Josh, because now he's fortunate that his parents set the context for him as a junior player, that they were not going to emphasize winning. They emphasized for him, and I think this took a lot of pressure off, to simply be the best person he could be, to have fun out there, right? To be a great kid. And maybe they kind of ported that purpose onto him a little bit, but it's a great purpose. So how he's assessing himself isn't so much on wins and losses as a junior, and he in New England is one of the greatest junior tennis records that we have here. And then he goes on to play for the University of South Carolina, which at the time was the top 15 team, still a great tennis program, men's tennis program. But that idea of simply becoming the best person you can be and acting that way on the court, so much more controllable, so much less pressure. And I believe, I could be wrong, you could listen back to that episode, but I believe Brian was number one in every single age group. I think he was number one in the 12s, 14s, 16s, and 18s. That's not easy to do. Lots of because a lot of body changes happen between 12 and 16, and it's hard to do it in all of those categories. But he did that. And, he also noted that in college, lost it a little bit and his game suffered. But when he brought it back to being the best person he could be, his game flourished again. So glad you mentioned that, Josh. That would be a good episode for people to listen to in terms of thinking about what is my purpose based identity. What is my purpose? What is something that I could legitimately buy into that would work for me? We can always give people ideas, but it really has to come from you, has to feel authentic to you as the player, or else it won't be a powerful motivator.
Totally, totally, and it's so much more controllable, right? It really is so much more controllable where you can go into a match and you can play your best tennis and you can lose. And I've had that experience. I think probably most people have had that experience. And if we're viewing things solely through performance, okay, I went out there, I played my best, I lost. Does that make it a failure? Did I did I fail out there in my match? Right? I mean, what if I'm playing somebody who's, you know, a level or multiple levels above me and I lost, but I played great and I made it competitive and I did everything I could do. I think we need to be able to see that as success. And we need to, if we're just viewing things as performance, it's very easy to not because it becomes all about winning and losing. And yeah, I think Brian is a great example of that. And I've known him, from back in the day when he was one of the coaches where I would train, and it was awesome having him on the podcast. And I would definitely encourage people to check out episode 2 where we interviewed him. But I think it really, I think he also made the point that it takes a lot of pressure off, right? If two people are playing and one person is saying, I'm trying to be the best person I can be, the best player I can be. And the other person is saying, yeah, I'm trying to be the best person and player I can be, but I need to win. Then player two is going to feel a lot more pressure. And I think for most people, most people, when you're experiencing that pressure, when you're experiencing, those sorts of thoughts, that doesn't tend to lead to your best tennis. That doesn't tend to help. And so I think, that first player is probably going to win a lot more. They're able to take some of the pressure off. They're able to really focus on what's most important. And I don't think there are things that are more important than being the best person you can be. And, in a tennis context, trying to do your best and be the best player you can be.
So just to fact check, Brian was number one in New England in the 14s, 16s, and 18s, not the 12s. Just went back to our episode notes on that. So if we were to help somebody develop purpose, Josh, what might be some questions or exercises that would, provoke some thoughts relative to purpose, you think?
Yeah, and I think it's an important thing to do early on. But I think being able to try to work with a player on, why do they play in the first place,
Yeah.
right? I think that can be an important starting point. What do they enjoy about the sport? Try to help them think back to particular moments where they've enjoyed the sport more, or maybe, what have been some of the maybe the most satisfying moments for them as a player, whether that's wins, whether that's other matches, whether that's just periods of time. So I would say that is an important starting point. I think also being able to dig in a little bit deeper into their values and, can they identify certain values and then try to think about, okay, are those values in line with how I'm operating on a daily basis? And then I think, those values can turn into that sort of filter where it comes, that sort of purpose-based approach that we're talking about here. So anyways, those are a few things that I, would look at relatively early on with a player to sort of build that foundation. How about you?
Well, I completely agree with what you said, and I think Dr. Jim Lair does a lot of work on the purpose side of things. So his book, The Power of Story, is an excellent framework for developing some of this purpose for yourself. He has another book called The Only Way to Win, which is a lot about character and competing in the right way. So I would point people to those works. Um, but I like what you're saying, Josh. Let's figure out why you play. Why do you compete? Let's talk about competition. We've talked many times on this podcast about healthy definitions of that. Well, let's talk about that. That I know is one of the first conversations I have with tennis players to understand the relationship between enjoyment, learning, and the desire to win. Talk about definitions of success. Maybe refer back to John Wooden's definition of success. We could talk about how you want to be viewed at the end of your career. Describe yourself. Let's say we're inducting you into a Hall of Fame. Well, what do you want people to say, both on the kind of ethical character side as well as you as an individual player? I think these are just some interesting questions and exercises that people can do. And if they put a lot into it, if you just write one sentence, you're not going to get a lot out of those exercises. But if you can really thoughtfully interrogate just how you feel about it, you can really begin to elicit some real purpose for yourself. Um, there's another guy who does story, happens to live in your town, Bob Litwin, who has been a national and world champion in several age groups. He has a book called Live the Best Story of Your Life. Very much, I want to say, based on the work of Jim Lair, but it's also a helpful construct to look at in terms of developing real purpose for why you play. And he has a powerful story. Um, and I would definitely recommend that book. So I think these questions are great starters. And then even if you want to go further, some of the books I just mentioned would help you develop that purpose for your tennis and your tennis project.
Totally. And I think learning from others, learning from the greats, reading Andre Agassi's book Open, right? Or reading, the biographies or autobiographies of tennis players, other athletes, other individuals, and seeing what they went through, seeing maybe how they found purpose in their own lives, and the impact that had. So I think we can, when it comes to finding purpose, I think it can be inspired by different sources, and I think reading from the stories of the greats can be a nice source for that as well.
For sure, for sure. So I think it's been an interesting discussion, Josh. But before we close, are there any last thoughts for the listeners?
No, I mean, I think I think it all starts with recognizing that it can't be all about winning and losing.
Yeah,
We all want to win. We all want to try to do whatever we can to win and be competitive. Sorry, and be competitive, but also be the best competitors we can be. And I think we've talked in the past about sort of the difference there between just being competitive, being like, okay, I want to win, being the best competitor, really being, am I doing everything in my power to make that, to give myself the best possible chance to make that happen? But it can't be all about that. So I think being able to dig a little bit deeper, being able to come up with, why am I doing this? Why is this meaningful? Why is this impactful? And operating from that sort of a perspective is the key to more of a sustainable, more of a resilient way of looking at things. And I think that will have a greater impact on each person ultimately, because it gives them an easier way to operate rather than this sort of default state of just seeing things through wins and losses and just judging ourselves based on performance.
and I always appreciate these conversations that we have, Josh, about purpose and character because I think one of the overall goals of sport, maybe not a goal, but a positive outcome of sport can be developing yourself as with good character, as a good, strong person, and that's obviously how we're promoting tennis. As it's beyond just hitting a yellow ball between lines, because that sounds a bit absurd anyway. So at the same time, can we be using the sort of unnecessary obstacles that tennis presents us as a means of building who we are. And so I really appreciate these types of conversations. And so I found this article fascinating. So thank you for that. And that's our show for today. Thank you all for listening. For more on today's episode, please check out the show notes. If you have any feedback or questions for me and Josh, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the content that Josh and I discuss on the show, please rate and review the podcast so other tennis enthusiasts can find it more easily. Additionally, to be notified of new episodes, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube. And you can also check us out on Instagram. If you would like to support the podcast, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership, where you can learn about the benefits of being part of the Tennis IQ podcast community. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.